talking about Web3 without definitions, but trying to understand the essence of it, the explanation of it, is the goal of this episode. Give sort of a Popperian explanation of what we understand under Web3 and why the opportunity is so big. Web3 is the thing that allows people to write software, decide what is and what isn't in a decentralized way, and use pretty much any computer in the world sort of as a virtual computer to execute that piece of software. The composability of Web3, which is the idea that once you write a piece of software, anybody can take that and build something on top of it, and it will do exactly what you, when you wrote it, wanted to intend with it. This is, in a way, very good, and also, of course, puts a lot of responsibility in people who write these pieces of software, because it's kind of, well, you can't reverse it. But nevertheless, the ability to, in a decentralized way, write all these pieces of software which are composable, creates an internet of identity, an internet of purpose, an internet of currency, and I don't mean just monetary currency, but an internet of accountability, which is just another word for currency that I want to use here. So those are the opportunities, and I think the reason it's so big is because we have new ways to organize society. So like everything in technology, of course, it has impact on society, but this has a much bigger impact because we can literally decide how we govern ourselves based on Web3. So, for example, we can create communities, we can create social networks, and that's one of the things that it seems that is already being done in Silicon Valley. I'm not a venture capitalist, so I don't know where the money is flowing right now, but what I'm hearing is that Web3-based social networks are interesting. So that is, what is a social network? A social network, in a sense, is almost like a country. Yeah, it's not physical, but almost all the other things that happen with countries, like taxation, safety, or safety from attacks, or things like that, can be organized within a social network. And while Web 2 had the beginnings of social networks, and if you want, Web 2 was more like Britain while the Vikings were invading. It was wild, or it is wild. There's trolling, there's violence, there's bad things going on, and we don't really have a way to police it other than being extreme, in a sense that we banish people or things like that. Versus in Web3, we have a more civilized way to do it, very similar to, and I've compared Web3 several times to the Renaissance, when we came back from sort of the Middle Ages with an idea of a legal state, of a state based on accounting, on legal practices. Professional services started to grow in the Italian cities of Florence and things like that, and then later on in the bigger cities like Berlin and Paris, when the nation state was built. Everything was built on professional services, on law, on parliament, on checks and balances, more or less. Of course, there were big differences, but it wasn't the absolute monarchy anymore. And now with Web3, of course, we have this way to organize. This is what I find so exciting. This is not even on podcast. It's June 8, 2022. This is Krim Delko. I'm in Europe right now. The markets just opened, but I don't want to talk. They really literally just opened a minute ago. I want to calibrate ourselves as of yesterday. So as of yesterday, we were down 42.1%. The market's down 11.9%. We're underperforming by 30.2%. Let's talk about Web3. So Web3 is being defined in many ways, and I don't want to be caught in a Wittgensteinian rat race here of what is Web3, how do I define it. So I want to more go to the Popperian way of reading from right to left. So the thing that allows people to write pieces of software in a decentralized network that then execute themselves based on what I wrote, which is composability, and also the thing that allows people to define what is and what isn't in a decentralized way by solving the Byzantine Generals Problem. That is the thing that I call Web3. So the two things is solving the Byzantine General Problem, defining what is and what isn't, defining truth through a decentralized process without authority, and also have composability in software. This is what Web3 is, and let's leave it at that. That alone is a huge base on which we can build, and I think it's enough to be excited about. So many other things that come with it, or many other derivations, such as money, for example, those are derivations. So Bitcoin is not Web3. Bitcoin is the killer app of the first sort of wave of Web3, if you want. That's what Bitcoin is. Because Bitcoin solves the problem of the truth, of what is and what isn't. It also solves the problem of composability, because once you have a Bitcoin and it's supposed to be what it is, which is the thing, the Bitcoin with the rules that are embedded in the network, then you know when you own it, and assuming it's worth something, it's based on the value of the rules within the context of the Bitcoin, and it also will execute that way going forward. So the tokens themselves, the software is not going to change. This is the big thing about Bitcoin. It's a little bit different with Ethereum, different with Algorand, different with other blockchains, and let's leave it at that. Again, this is not a definition type episode. This hopefully is going to be an inspirational episode in the sense that it inspires us, but also everybody else who listens, of what is possible. The purpose of this podcast, of the Not Even Wrong podcast, is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we're not a technology podcast here. We're not defining technologies, things like that. But we're trying to explain what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And what it feels like to run a hedge fund is very much, at least within the context of Orange Capital Partners, which is the purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. This is what we're trying to do. In other words, we're trying to find what the future is going to look like by looking at what's available today in terms of technologies and science and applications and entrepreneurs. Because those are the people that actually execute, that actually develop the future of wealth creation. And also, we believe at Orange Capital Partners, wealth creation can only happen through innovation. Because all the other types of wealth creation are just, it can happen. You can raid people. I mean, Putin's trying to create wealth for himself by attacking Ukraine and things like that. You can do wealth like that. We don't want to play that game. We want to play the innovation game, the Silicon Valley game. It's not always clean, of course. It doesn't always help everybody, and it doesn't always change the world in a good way, but it's still the best way to create wealth, and it has a lot more positive side effects and negative side effects. So back to Web3. The reason we're talking about this, I hope by now is obvious. This is a massive, massive opportunity. We think that there's massive, massive wealth creation to be had here, and we are thinking of investing in those types of technologies. We have only invested in the one killer app right now, which is Bitcoin. We also own a little bit of Ethereum and Algorand, but the big investment is in Bitcoin, because we believe that money, particularly wealth storage, in the form of Bitcoin, is the first killer application, and it will pertain and proliferate and become very, very valuable, as measured in other types of goods and services and currencies, such as dollars, for example. But let's talk now about, so what I said again, the sort of Popperian definition of Web3, it is the thing that defines what is and what isn't in a decentralized way, and it is the thing that allows for composability. So those are the big two things that we carry forward right now when we talk about Web3. So all the other things that come with it are, again, derivations for us. But so what does that mean? Why are, let's talk about an application that we think could be very big, which is a Web3 based social network. Why is that important? What's the difference between a Web3 based social network and a Web2 based social network? Well, here's the difference. In a Web3 based social network, you can define within the protocol what you want the social network to behave like. So for example, trolling can be punished, and good conversation, however you define good, can be rewarded. And because there is composability, and because there is a decentralized way to define what is and what isn't, see, there's no authority. There's no nobody sitting on Market Street in San Francisco on the 10th floor of whatever building Twitter is and deciding what is and what isn't, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. The protocol itself is designed in a way to incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior. So bad behavior, for example, trolling, is defined, it can be algorithmatized and actively discouraged. You can do that, for example, by distributing tokens to people in the network. And you need a certain amount of tokens to participate in the network. You might even have to pay to be part of the network, something that Elon Musk is suggesting with Twitter. So you buy yourself into, let's say, Twitter Web3, and you have 100,000 tokens. And by actively participating on the network, you can either gain or lose those tokens. If you do nothing, you start losing them. So if you're not active, they're gonna start diminishing. You have to be active. And if you do it in a good way, let's say if you bring in other followers, if you participate in conversations that get cited, that maybe also create new threads or solve problems, sort of things, that kind of thing, you get rewarded. And if you troll, and trolling being, let's say, if you just yell and scream at people, if you use bad words, and whatever trolling is, I mean, this goes into the field already of, I would say, network design or tokenomics. So it's not so easy to define what that actually means, and how do we define a Web3 based social network, and what is good, what is bad. All of these things are very, very difficult to design, but at least we have the tools to do it. And I think what we're going to need is a lot of iteration. There's going to have to be many, many Web3 type social networks, and then one of them will happen, and maybe a few of them will happen, hopefully more than one. But the point here is that the design of this network and the tokenization of the network, so how do these tokens work? Who gets rewarded for what? All of these questions will have to be answered, and they're not easy, and those are things that people should be doing PhDs on. But it's not very dissimilar from the system that we have today with the law. And let's say we want free speech. Well, we still don't know what free speech exactly is, but we have a sense for it, and we've built a whole society over hundreds of years based on free speech. But what Web3 allows us is to go on with this and make it a little bit more tangible, algorithmatize it, decentralize it, have people in Bangladesh, Silicon Valley, Croatia, and Lima participate in the creation of this network. So those are things that weren't possible before. Before the decentralization of wealth creation, which is, one of the things that Web3 allows is decentralization of wealth creation. Again, this is not a definition of Web3, it's a derivation, but it does allow it. And I think this in itself is already, I think if anybody is questioning the value of Web3 or something like that, I think this should solve the problem. We are on the cusp of a massive, massive wave of wealth creation because we have this ability to, in a decentralized way, create good things, create things that are valuable to people. The two applications other than money are, one is, like I said, Web3-based social networks, the other is Web3-based games, earn to play, things like that. I'm not too much involved in that. I can see the value there too. One of the things that I think Web3 allows is, for example, the build out of a network effect, and also the design of a network effect in a way like how much network effect do I actually want. So those are all things that I would add to the values that Web3 gives us, or the opportunities. So to summarize, Web3 is the thing that allows us to define what is and what isn't in a decentralized way without authority, and it allows composability of software. So once a piece of software is in the network, it will execute, and if you use it as a base for your own piece of software, and the third party and fourth party that is using those pieces as base for their piece of software, all these things are composable in a sense that they work sort of like Lego blocks. That is the analogy being used. And I think at this point, we're left with fantasy, meaning we can just think, okay, this has huge potential. There's nothing really tangible I can point at right now. Like even within the Web3 sort of first wave of like DAOs and DeFi and all that, we've seen applications, but to be fair, they haven't been overwhelming. For example, DeFi was interesting for me as a former options trader. I could see how DeFi kicks in. You create contracts, which are options, but the upside in a Web3 environment is you could have let's say a simple call option on Tesla. and you can use that call option and buy a house with it. And then the person that sold you the house takes that and buys a car with it. So it's you can use that as a currency. It's composable. It just does what it's supposed to do, which is pays out X if Tesla goes Y, and so on and so forth. Vitalik Buterin had an interesting idea on his Lex Friedman appearance about 2 years ago. He spoke about the ability to, let's say, solve externalities or things like that, or moral hazard. And some of the biggest problems in economics, actually, let's say externalities, are, in my view, are not solved yet and could be solved with Web3 type technology. So, for example, this is an externality. If I buy a large SUV, I create lots of externalities. You know, it's a big car. It is very bad for the environment, makes noise, it's intimidating. So, and it's not fully priced. That's why people are buying these things, in a sense that we don't have a price for noise. We don't have a price for ugliness, things like that. So you could have a contract that says, well, if you buy, if you use this particular, let's say if you use Ethereum to buy a car like that, well, then you have to pay double the amount. You can use something else, but then the person that sells it to you, you know, might use something else. So you could have kind of a competition of tokens, and then slowly but surely, some of the tokens will win, others will lose. So we could have a more efficient way of allocating resources. We could have a better way to price externalities. We could do the same thing with a lot of things in society. I mean, this is just one example, externalities. Another one is moral hazard. Free riding is another thing. So a lot of these problems could be at least tackled a lot more efficiently with tokens than they're being tackled right now with currency. So these are some of the great opportunities. I think if we could solve some of those issues, like externalities, free riding problems, or at least get better solutions for them, this alone would create enormous amounts of value and wealth, and also make societies much better. One of the best applications actually I've heard in terms of using tokens is the idea of building, let's say, a community solar system. So let's say you have a solar contractor who wants to install solar roofs on 100 houses and connect them and do a virtual power plant with them. And you could create a smart contract which says that if everybody chips in, you can start building. So the contract only pays out if everybody chips in. So that way, there's no free riding. So if I'm the 99th person in that community that thinks, well, if I don't chip in, everybody else chips in, who cares? I mean, I'm just one, everybody else chips in, I'm just a tiny one, but I get this for free. Well, guess what? If I don't chip in, I know it's not going to be built. So that way, either everybody or nobody builds. So this solves an externality problem and could create enormous amounts of sort of bottom-up projects that could be much more efficient than what we have right now, where these all big utilities, central monopolies and all that, try to solve our energy problem. This is just one example, and I think this is the exciting part of Web3, and I'm very, very looking forward to a lot more of these applications. And of course, we're also looking to invest in those types of applications. Thank you.